Okay, it's Wednesday, October 12th. This is a SPY recap, and sort of as expected on the daily chart, you can see today was a very narrow day inside of the previous day with a little bias to the downside. And as we wait for the big CPI number tomorrow, the market wasn't ready to go anywhere, and that was sort of anticipated. If we look at the actual trading activity on the session, first of all, if you note, we never really got above the halfway point of yesterday to consider any kind of up bias. We never really got above the pre-market highs. So this first green bar of the day kind of came down. It looked like you were going to get a breakout, but by the time the 15-minute bar ended, it was a little bit green. And then you just kind of watch it. I mean, this is not the type of green bar here that you immediately buy and expect to head to the top of the range, given the overall, like I said, the context in play at the moment. And essentially, if it was going to go up there, what I would have looked for is like maybe a few green bars up, and then the first pull back to the midpoint of that bar, and then another push to try to test those highs. But anyway, instead, what it did was on bar two, it immediately, it went up for just a brief moment. Then we had the red bar. At that point, I was actually kind of watching the halfway point, watching if we were going to break below the pre-market lows, and I decided to buy some puts in here. And then as I was watching it, I had one little push up that it didn't bother me. Then it came down again. And then I sort of shot a video saying at this point, the trade was about at break even. And for the most part, that was the way to play it. You just knew you were in consolidate. You weren't really following through the downside. There was no reason to be looking at the upside. And if you held all the way all day long, then you eventually, it paid off at some point near the end of the day. But all this action here, if you're really looking at the context in play, knowing the big number tomorrow, knowing we've already reached some targets on the downside temporarily and everything else, and it was sort of a day where you were expecting every push up to be met with selling, push down to be, just the choppiness. And that was kind of what happened yesterday as well. And if you go now over 2 days, you can see here we're chopping. It's almost 3 days worth of overlapping data here. So what that means is going forward, normally when I see an inside day, if it breaks the low of this day, you target that first low right here, which is very close to it. You can see here, if we break the low, which I'm assuming we will, at some point you're going to hit that target. But the question whenever I see an inside day is whether you get continuation or failure. So in other words, if we come down tomorrow and then immediately fail to continue lower and then go to the halfway point of that range, then I'm actually expecting like a downward move and then back to the midpoint of that range. Then I'm expecting the high to be taken out, and then there are other targets up here. So anyway, it's kind of like the situation up here. If you remember the videos I shot, we had a lot of consolidation. There were actually justification to go a little higher. There was justification to fill gaps lower. And in this case, though, if you look at the 15-minute chart, and there was justification to fail. I was always conscious of that maybe we'd start one way and then come back through the range and have a failure, in the opposite, or then, moving to the other end of the range. So in this case, though, from this consolidation, we had a big gap down, and then it didn't immediately try to fill back up. It immediately went lower. So at that point, you knew this was a strong breakout from consolidation. So now with these 3 days, and that's really what it is, 3 days, if we get some kind of big gap that just never even looks back, then we're heading down to the bigger picture monthly targets down here. Again, you can gap up for some reason, and same thing. You want to look for a failure up here. If not, then we're gapping up, and we have a lot of targets above. But a lot of volatility is going to happen, at 7:30 with the CPI number. So we're going to see an interesting, we may be way above or below this area, by the time the number hits. Obviously, it seems to be negative reaction, but you never know. It could be finally the time where you get that negative reaction early, but then you get the reversal at some point in the day. Just given the fact we have a little exhaustion risk to the downside. But anyway, it'll all depend on how the market opens. Pre-market, we'll see how price reacts to that news, and then by 8:30 we'll see how the market opens in the first 15-minute bar and everything else. So we'll do that for now. But today, again, very expected in terms of waiting to see what's going on. Choppiness, no real great opportunities. Actually, there were a few, in terms of Like Meta, I actually took a secondary sell here and took it down to the lows of the day. But I mean, there were some things, if you just watch the typical, first push and second push kind of format, I like to look at below, pre-market, in this case, below pre-market activity. There were certain individual stocks that did actually offer opportunities, but the market as a whole was just kind of consolidating. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. Big day. And again, just expect the volatility after the number, and we'll see. We'll see how it goes relative to this consolidation period. Now, that's the way I'm viewing it all. And the key is either to be breakout, one way or the other, or an attempted failure, and then move back through the other direction.